And welcome back, everybody, to Humaning 103 by the Interintellect. This is our special where we discuss mysterious aspects of living like a human being on Earth, which is a very, very complicated affair and often, contains much more contradictions than we would expect. And we already expect a lot, so that's a lot. And this episode, we will be talking about writing our own life stories and how does it look? Can we do that? Are we the actors or directors or screenwriters of our own life movies? Or is this like a Mel Gibson movie when it's just like all of that together? And I'm joined by two fantastic intellects, Laura Sinisterra, who is in Brazil, but originally from Colombia, and Seyi Taylor, who is in Canada, but originally from Nigeria. And as myself, I am originally from Hungary, but in Belgium right now. This is as interintellect as it can get. We are multidisciplinary, multinational, and multi-continental. And this is I just love this so much. How are you guys? How are you feeling? And what is on your mind?
Oh, good. I was wondering if maybe we were in the Final Destination movie instead of a Mel Gibson movie. So we have like these whole things that happens around us, and maybe we don't get to focus. We don't get to do much, or maybe we do. Who knows?
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I think when I think about this topic, I think about the idea that, so I'm a big fan of the idea of agency, of the idea of owning, of like that you have more agency than you think. And I'm also cognizant like life doesn't also work that way. Like I'm also, so it's like, I believe in agency and I believe in like divine sovereignty and like things are happening and you have to deal with like the options. And yet I believe that within the mess of life and like what's given to you or presented to you is that you can choose how to play the cards that are handed to you, essentially. So you have choice in that you have choice in how you react. You have choice in how you accept it, what you do, what you accept, what you don't accept, how you take it. I feel that's my philosophy. I try to live up to it. I don't always get there, but I try.
Yeah, I think like it's equally important what you accept, like what you say yes to and what you say no to, because sometimes we reject things that are helpful, like because they're scary. Like for example, I was so scared to accept this conversation, so scared. Like I'm still I'm not very comfortable with having my face on the internet. But it's I don't know, it's just, well, I think more than my face is my voice. Like I'm not going to be ashamed of, like, embarrassed when I hear myself talking, but at the same time this is fun and I'm sure I'm going to learn something from this.
I think so. And because you are both incredibly creative, but kind of out of the box people. As I was preparing for today, I was thinking like, how am I going to introduce them? What am I going to say? Like Laura is ... Shay is ... And then I realized you guys need your own categories, really. And this is kind of true about a lot of very creative people, that no kind of pigeonhole that has been prepared for young people will be fully fitting for you. Laura, you told me that you identify as a designer and self-learner. And Shay, you are a product guy, resident enfant terrible, and you both said you are creators of things. And it's a really interesting thing that we started using the word creator for humans, right? For many centuries, this kind of adjective, or used as a noun, used to denote deities, gods, destiny. And so I started thinking today about the history of how humans thought about free will throughout the past millennia, right? Up to the Greeks, we thought that destiny was written for you by the time you're born, and all you do is you try to kind of defy the gods, but at the end of the day you will reach Ithaca when Athena wants you to, or allows you to. Then we had the philosophical revolutions of the Mediterranean, which partly resulted in the ascension of Christianity. We started grappling with and debating the idea of free will. Are you fighting God's will or kind of moving along it? How does your free will, play into it? And I feel like today we are kind of in this schizophrenic, confusion about it. Whereas, maybe earlier eras, humans in earlier eras could just like chill and say, oh, this was God's will. Or maybe some people today still say, oh, it's because my Mars is in the 5th house, so there's nothing I can do. So how do you see, do you see yourself as people identifying as creators as examples of your times or children of the future? Are you ahead of your times in that sense?
That's a good question. I don't know. So I thought it's like really interesting. In my culture, traditionally, there's like a very strong sense of destiny and the idea of destiny and and fate. But I was also brought up like in a Christian tradition. And in a Christian tradition, there is a creator, but there's also like the concepts, that you are gods, right? So essentially, this is like the New Testament. The New Testament philosophy is that you are gods and you are creators. And there's a whole bunch of stuff around which Americans really popularized in the 70s up till like the 2000s around the evangelical philosophy around whatever you say will happen, if you bind on earth, blah, 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 that kind of thing, which is the ability to say, this is what you want and kind of like direct your life. And so I think that aspect of being a quote unquote creator, which is a term that people are using now, but I think for people who have even been told you're creative, 10, 20 years ago, was around like being artistic. And now we're saying, well, no, you're actually making things. And it's not just about being creative and artistic. You're now using that instinct to build things. And I think the other word, which we're seeing, especially like in technology or in technology space, is the word builder, which we're seeing a lot more of, to describe people who are responsible for making things and what's the name. And then if you think about, say, about 5+ years ago, we had the maker movement. So it's around the same idea around just, people. And I think that the fundamental idea, I think that the core idea there is not about an instinct towards artistic tendencies anymore, but towards production and having the agency and the decision to make a thing that you have conceived in your head, right? And I think it's a recognition of a time that we are in right now where more people have more tools to make things. Of course, I have a slightly, I have my own personal complaints about that idea because a lot of stuff that we're creating is media and content. And that term goes like, oh, you're a creator because you're writing a newsletter, you're making a podcast, or you're making videos and all that stuff. And a lot less and digital goods and a lot less physical goods, and where.
And the word maker is also something that's familiar from religious contexts, as with a capital M, right?
Yes.
It used to be an exclamation.
In a religious context, but I think that I think that what has happened is that we've come to a point in history where individuals feel empowered to bring some of their thoughts to life, and I think that's where that term comes from. So how do I feel? Well, I think that's an instinct I've had for a very long time about the ability to bring some of the things that I want to life, and I think that for me is like super important. I don't know if it's a wave of the future as much as it's internally for me has always been how I felt about myself and my ability to do that. And I've always wanted to explore that just a little more.
Okay, so yeah, about this creating the future and what you mentioned about creating media, I think um, in the moment that we are now, creating media and thinking about media in a very like outside of the box way is a very important thing, because it is the future, and like the images we need to create for ourselves are going to be there, because those images don't exist now. They only exist in these awful stereotypes of this is how a woman looks like, this is how a man looks like, this is how you're supposed to act. And we need to really create media and change that. And this creation of media is creating the future, I think. And I don't know, I think there's something magical about creating objects in the real world, like physical objects, that I really like. That's why I like creating things. Like I made these earrings. Those are my contributions to the world.
I'm also wondering, I mean, we kind of like rushed through the history of free will in a very kind of superficial Super Mario way. But immediately preceding our kind of era of absolute technology, we, for a couple of decades, as the human community on Earth, were kind of convinced that, God is over, we don't have to worry about, that kind of, will and our will against it or with it. It's all, everything is material, and we can just like build the world and control our environment to unprecedented degrees. And I think for our generation, both the limits of that are becoming apparent. Like you can't actually you don't necessarily have that much of an elbow room if you want to look after the health of society and this planet. And on the other hand, we are again made to revise a lot of the questions of free will through, both biotechnology or just what computers seem to be able to do. I mean, we just had a fantastic release by OpenAI that I think made a lot of people think about like Westworld and things like that. And when you say that I'm a creator, I'm a maker, this is a little bit in revolt against this. To say that we do things that maybe machines can't do, or which you can't tell about a human just looking into a dish with a microscope. You won't be able to tell that, you may be able to tell that this person has the traits to be creative, but you won't be necessarily able to tell that this person is going to be the next, Leonardo da Vinci or Johnny Mitchell. So do you guys feel that we are in rebellion, or are we more like in the flow actually than those who don't follow in this way?
It's like we need a moment to like
Yeah.
settle everything to say something. It's so funny. Okay, go ahead.
You go. You go.
Okay, I'll go. I have strong opinions, very strong opinions, because I think, and what we were saying like 5 minutes ago about making mistakes, I think making mistakes is so powerful, really. And like, I always think in art history for some reason, because I love it. And I think, for example, in how the Impressionists, like, they just wanted to have these different, they wanted to show a different way of looking at the world, and without making something so imperfect, because at the time it was imperfect, it wasn't in the perfect technique, and everyone hated that because that doesn't look like an arb, like a tree. That's something else. That's a bunch of lines, and we need to make more mistakes and make some very different ways of looking at trees. That's important, and not like not a machine is never going to do that. It's impossible.
It's a little bit like that moment in art history where, we started with the prints on the cave wall, right? And then we somehow were just like flexing so much to probably be popular in our community or something, that we kind of made it all the way up to like photorealism. That was just like a long series of humans trying to outflex each other. And then, wow, the photography happened, and a lot of people were just like, standing there with their brush going like, oh, I need to just like get abstract, and express my emotions. And I'm thinking maybe this is where we're headed as well. Like so many things will be like just like taken over by better technology than how humans seem to be. And just we will have to go a bit crazy and go a bit abstract, whatever that will mean then.
I think that we're always. I think that we're at the point. Your point about photography is actually like super brilliant, because it just really does like explain like a bunch of things. I think that we're at an interesting inflection point in looking at technology. I was like looking at this GPT-3 thing. I follow now on Instagram, which I deleted. But anyway, I follow on Instagram a handle called essentially some version like Humans of AI, where the picture is a generated AI generated picture, and the story is written by GPT-3. What's the word? So it's like Humans of New York, but essentially like everything's generated by computer. So it's like coherent stories and pictures that look somewhat realistic. And the whole thing is just generated by AI there. It's very fascinating what's possible. And I think in many ways, things like that almost always, advances in technology almost always make us ask ourselves, so what's my point? Because what's the point of me, right? Because a lot of the value that we attach to ourselves is in things that we produce. And so we say, well, I'm a builder, I make software, I do this. This is what I do. Oh, there's a piece of code that can make a website faster than I can. And easier than I can. So, Anna needs to make a website. She goes to talk to this web developer. He gives her like a ton of attitude. And, because he derives a sense of importance from that conversation, they have a negotiation. She pays money to him for getting the website. That money is the price for the skill and time, he's invested in learning how to do that. He trades that for the things that he wants. And then he goes back and delivers the website. And then one day somebody creates an AI or something because I saw that's one of the demos that basically tells Anna, well, you just tell this AI, I want a website that says Anna Gat, best person in the world, in like slightly smaller text, and put it on anagat.com.
Yeah, just like shakes its head like, no, sorry, it's not compatible with the data.
And the AI does it, doesn't argue, doesn't do anything, doesn't say this is not true, just puts up the website on anagat.com. She doesn't deal with what's name. She pays $5 a month for it, So that web developer sits down and says to himself, what's the point of me? Right? And this is the story that we've told through time. The monks who used to rewrite and copy like the manuscripts, replaced by printing press and and all of that. And just from going with it, and there's a whole bunch. I feel like, for example, like half of the angst around like media and journalism right now within the media and tech space is a bunch of people saying, so what's the point of me? And what's the point of like everything I invested in creating this thing? But I think that there is a point of humanity beyond creation. I feel that is creation. A creator is a thing that you are, but you are not a creator. It's like it's a thing that you are, right? It's like, you know, it's the other things that you can do to people that you love, your family, relationships that you build. I think one of the things that the machines today aren't doing as well. And there are people trying. By the way, I have like an app on my phone that's supposed to be like an AI friend. I tested it, I thought it was ridiculous, insane, but apparently, you know, it's working for some people. But yeah, I think there's a sense in which people create to remind themselves, like it's almost like touching yourself, like I'm still here and I'm still important, but also to say, you know, to tell the world is like, this is a thing I made and this proves that I have value, I'm XYZ, and this is a way for me to express myself in the world. I think that humans will try to make things all the time. I think that that's like what humans do.
I'm also wondering, and you know, because of the Interintellect salons, I'm in this incredibly privileged position that I get to have conversations with almost like I don't know, hundreds of people a week, right? Who come to the salons, and we are very conversational and we try to be really balanced. And a lot of people get to share things from the most philosophical or professional ideas to the most personal stories and experiences. And I do feel that there is, coming from people who identify as makers, who consider, you know, Shay, you mentioned that we have all these attributes in life. You know, we are all a city of a variety of people trying to coexist in a relatively balanced and democratic way, hopefully with your best self leading or making the final call. There's some people to whom this makerness is in the forefront. I expect themselves to be that creative also in how they shape their own lives, right? And they tend to extract some kind of sense of failure when that agency is diminished, because you have so much agency in your work. You're, you know, manifesting your ideas into the physical plane of existence all the time. But like real life doesn't go that way always, right? Sometimes you have a major pandemic and you're stuck at home and you can't fly or you can't meet your family, you know, like there are so many things that can be imposed upon you. And I'm wondering, do you think that this is just an expectation we have toward ourselves? Like I also identify as a builder, as a startup founder and a writer. Is this just an exaggerated expectation we have from ourselves, or is this really like we have this extra skill and there's something we can teach to people? Because if it's a skill that we can teach, then I feel that then there's a responsibility that comes from it as well.
Yeah, I think it's, yeah, I think we can as makers we can make things, and as creators we can create and see and shape what we want with our life. But at the same time, it's a very personal decision. If you don't want to, I mean, I can teach you, I can say to you, like, Anna, do this, because if you do this, you're going to be happy. Trust me, no, it's not like that. Because what I was thinking is like the complexity of our every individual in the world, it's completely different and their whole experience is shaped differently, and you can't know and you can't have like one solution for everyone. So I think if there is a trick, the trick will be know your particular situation and work with your individual experience, because like that's the only way that is going to work something different.
I agree. I agree with that. I think there's definitely, yeah, you have to choose. But I think it's a little bit of both. I think there's a sense in which you're expecting things from yourself that may not be expected of you. I think it's also like the concept of integrity is always like, but the thing about the concept of integrity is like, if we think about like a bar of steel, right? And it's like, does this bar of steel have integrity? Essentially, it's like, is it itself throughout, right? Or is it broken like somewhere in the middle? And so the idea is like, is when you tell yourself, well, I'm a creative person, I'm a maker, I'm a builder, there is a sense in which this is not, I feel like subconsciously, you're always trying to make, build, bend things to your will. And I think that subconsciously that's not put on you by the world, but that's something that you've kind of like built into yourself, and you're saying, well, it's a pandemic and I can't travel, and I had like all these travel plans. So the next things I'm going to do is I'm going to build like all these relationships and friendships across the world on the internet, and kind of like travel to all these people, because that's kind of like how I deal with these things, right? Like, okay, so all this free time that I have, what am I going to do with it? And then you come up with like a bunch of schemes and ideas and plans, right? And then some other people who might not naturally be inclined, or that's not their self-narrative, they're doing something else with it. They're enjoying themselves or watching like a bunch of Netflix. There is nothing wrong with either direction, please. So it doesn't sound like I'm judging anything. I'm just saying that your self-narrative is also directs like a lot of like what your decisions and actions are. But in many ways, I think also that it's a teachable skill, in that ability to what I think everyone learns and chooses and decides over time how much agency they have about the current situation that they have, or accepts or realizes or deals with that in different ways. So that if you went to and this is probably a horrible example, but if you went to a refugee camp today, right, you would find different levels of acceptance, agency, activity among different people within that camp. And these are horrible situations. You will find different levels of like people taking this thing. If you went to Silicon Valley today, for example, where there are lockdown orders, or even a town where it's like there's wealth and what's name, you would find exactly the same things, different levels within the scope of the circumstances. You'll find people who say, this is a horrible situation and I'm stuck. And you'd find people like my friend who's like, this is a horrible situation, but here's how it works for me at this stage of like building my company. Which every time we talk about it, he sounds like a complete lunatic, except that he's making it work. Like he's actually making it work within the context of the insanity that's going on. And
Sorry, Shay, do you mind repeating the last sentence, because you were there was a delay?
Yeah, no, I think my app did it. What's the name? So that's say that this is not me judging anyone or judging anything, but it's kind of, this is how I think it kind of plays out in the end. That there is an element of like nature, but there's also an element in which this is a teachable art to say, how do you deal with this situation? Well, in whatever situation, I think people at different points come to an understanding of saying, this is how much I have more agency than I believe. And I feel like no matter how much agency you think you have, you almost always have more than you believe. I think that it's very rare to find a human being who has an accurate assessment of the amount of agency they have in a situation. It is almost always, is really rare. I think most people almost always underestimate how much agency they have, myself included.
I love this point so much, and I think your example of the refugee camp, where people in very similar situations will have very different senses of their own level of agency. I think that's absolutely brilliant, and it makes me think about how this must be true at the other end of the spectrum as well. So you're, a 30-year-old man from a mainstream culture in wherever you are, and you've just received a giant inheritance, for example, right? So it looks like, that the world is at your feet. People will have very different reactions to this situation, right? And I mean, there's research to kind of prove or at least strongly indicate that we have a kind of baseline level of happiness as humans, which is largely hereditary. And whatever happens to you in 18 months, you will, return to that same level of happiness. But actually, my follow-up question would have been, and I'm so happy that you kind of like wandered there, just following your own train of thought. Is like, how do we judge how much agency you have, and how do I know that I'm overestimating or underestimating? How do I have to experiment? Do I have to just have friends who give me feedback? Because, if most of the people are wrong about how much they have, and assumably most of us underestimate how much agency we have, then there has to be some kind of a feedback loop, right? I mean, nobody wants to be wrong, especially not about something so enormously kind of important and all pervasive. How do we do that? Laura, what do you think? You're just like looking very, very knowingly like, yep.
No, I have no idea. Of course, I have no idea. But what I was thinking about it is like being open to possibilities. And it's like I'm very curious, and I always say that, like, I'm a very curious person, and I'm always like putting myself into uncomfortable situations, like out of my comfort zone. And I think that's a part of what like gives you more freedom into acting and getting to places. But I'm not sure if this has anything to do with what we were talking about.
I think it has everything to do with it. How do you know where your comfort zone is? I mean, to live it, in order to live something, you have
in order to live it, yeah. If it feels easy to do, I'm not so interested. If it feels like I need to do a big effort, I'm going to do it. And that's like, but that's because I have Saturn in my second house, so
it explains everything. I heard that the best decisions in life were made because of different houses.
No, but like being serious, trying to be more serious. I think I will call that like an active curiosity, like having curiosity and following and acting on the curiosity that you have, and that's always going to like get you out of your comfort zone.
I found that after immigrating multiple times in my life, I basically kind of lost track of where my comfort zone was. So I used to joke about this, that I haven't seen my comfort zone in such a long time. I don't know how it looks anymore. And it kind of like makes everything outside it. And it's also an interesting thing, because the reason why we like to kind of dwell inside our comfort zone when we know where it is because not just the familiarity, but because of the sense of comfort. And where everything else out there is scary, because all the elements that are beyond your comfort zone kind of require active negotiation, right, to figure out how much that thing will be under your control or not. And I find that maybe because of all these kind of philosophical and spiritual changes that we've gone through in the past, say, 200 years, we don't always know how to do these forms of negotiation. And I think it's most apparent in relationships. Like, how do it's uncertainty, and you negotiate with another person, but also there is the familiarity, and it's supposed to be like your anchor in life. And you kind of see how humans are, you can neither kind of like subject yourself to it fully or subjugate yourself to it, but you also can't be the creator who will just like, project all your ideas, and then this other person will make them come to life. Like, these are basically all the two ways in which to fail, right? So what is in the middle? And could finding that middle ground be any useful for other areas of life?
So I think if you're comfortable with the idea that you will fail multiple times in pushing yourself, and you have, so there are two views to failure, which is one is that it's not fatal, but that it can, but then the other one is that it can be. And you know, there's like a lot of like motivational talk around like how failure is not the end. Failure means you've learned, but some failures are, you know, yeah, they're the end. Essentially, you've learned quite all right, you know, but you're dead. Whatever it is, right? You've learned, but you're dead. And
Those
so
are the kind of failures where you expect other people to learn from your failure, right? It's like, yeah, guys, don't do this with the plug, and then this person's dead, but all the others will learn from the newspaper articles and the tweets about this. Yeah.
Exactly. It's like the ecosystem has learned at the expense of this particular organism. Isn't it fantastic? So now we know, for example, if you're building this type of company, you shouldn't do this because brave Steve went and did this thing, and Brave now works at Walmart, and you know, now we know. You know, so now we know. And I think that in many ways, there are some ways where you can't avoid that kind of risk. I think there's some risks, unfortunately, it's like one way or the other. Like you take a second mortgage, you lose the home, you lose your family, you know, and then you're working minimum wage, kind of like, or you know, you're working somewhere to try and like make it. It happens all the time. And yet, there is a sense in which like trying to not stretch, push, extend also creates a bunch of challenges. In the idea around like how much agency do we have, the fundamental question I think for me is almost like, so in this situation that you find yourself is like, what can you do? And the first thing you can do, I think that I've tried to remember is that you can manage your psychology. I think that's one place where people struggle with. People think a lot about agency in terms of like outward activity, but inward activity, managing your psychology is probably like the biggest strength biggest show of agency, of reframing situation in a way that is manageable, not a lie, but manageable, because almost every situation can be framed in a different way. I think that's definitely like very super powerful in figuring that out. I think if you're able to do that, then from there comes like a bunch of things, you know. And we see this, I haven't had the opportunity or the privilege or the challenge of facing really dark, deep situations, but we've seen this in history all the time. We've seen Mandela, we've seen Malcolm X, we've seen, you know, Martin Luther King, we've seen people in horrible situations display amazing agency in how they view the situations and how their change in the frame of the situation allowed them to take some actions, which in retrospect, which inspired a bunch of people. In retrospect, was it? Now we also know that a lot of people took the same view. We don't disagree because they're survivors. They survived those situations. We knew other people who went through that and didn't survive. So I'm not talking about agency as a guarantee for survival or for success. I'm talking about agency as a how to manage your psychology in challenging situations, because we're all in challenging situations, and there is no guarantee that we're going to come out of situations or that those situations are going to come out like fantastic. But it's important to manage how we think about them, how we operate through them, and like in managing how we think and how we operate through them, having the capacity to live to our higher selves, if that makes any sense.
I'm thinking as you were talking, Seyi, this word kept coming into my mind, the precipice. And I just received this book, and you might be ordered, the Future of Humanity Institute, that's called The Precipice. That's the name of the book, about extinction events, and like that there are fatal mistakes, and that if we as this planet make fatal mistakes, then there will be nobody to learn from it, unless there are some other civilizations intergalactically that are watching over us and trying to learn how are we messing this up to later on do a better job with their planet. And I'm thinking, like, when it comes to whether it's from a design perspective or from a technology perspective, or just generally as humans who are creators and at least on the ambition level trying to be creators of our own lives, what is our precipice? Do you ever think, do you think that you have like a self-destruct button in terms of like decisions, whether that's personal or professional? And is that something, Laura, you were talking about how everybody has a different story, but do you feel that your potential kind of self-destruct button is common, or at least common enough that it's important to talk about it, just as we talk about self-destruct buttons on the human community level?
What I think about this, like for me, my self-destruction button will be inaction. Like I feel like if I ever stop like acting on the things that I want to do, even if they feel crazy or whatever, that's like that will start to feel horrible. And like I really like what you said about managing the psychology. And I think for me, like the best way of managing my psychology is like being active and like knowing that I'm like going forward into some things that I want to do. So my precipice will be the inaction, like stop acting on the things.
I'm just going to say that I agree. It seems very similar to me in my head. I think inaction is probably definitely like right there. Yeah, that's what I'd say.
So we are technically sharks who need to keep moving, right?
I think in the background, I'm going to like just step up and like close this window because there's a really loud hum from outside.
Sure. When the COVID situation worsened in Brussels, there was also always the clapping at around 8, right? And it was really interesting to kind of, we are all locked into our own apartments and our living rooms and whatnot, and then you kind of hear this collective level sound. It was really wonderful as a perfect reminder. Thank you so much, guys. I think we covered the good ground that may help people who identify as creators, as makers, to feel the potentials, but also in some ways the limitations of how, when we try to apply wisdom for living as creators onto our own lives. Is there anything else you would like to add that feels very specific to this current situation, when we don't know how long are the lockdowns going to last? When can we go back to flying, traveling, going out again? How should humans manage this period of confinement when we all have to be super inventive with our time and our minds as well?
I think reframing the I don't want to say like this is an opportunity and be super, because I'm very optimistic and I always think like that, but I don't want to go that way. But I really think we need to like reframe ourselves. Like this is a changing moment and we need to see it as change, and that's it. Not like let's change the world or let's just be depressed. I think you need to be like, okay, this is a changing situation and I'm going to adapt in the best way that I can and do my best, and that's fine. That's it.
Yeah, I have to agree. I don't think there's, I think there's a sense in which some people have maybe more grandiose visions of, this is ushering your future. And, if you do, well, thumbs up to you. And some people feel, well, this is a temporary situation and it will get, and we need to prepare for what happens on the other side of that. And then, if that's the story you need to tell yourself, then that's fine. I think there's an enormous amount of uncertainty into just like what happens next. There are some things we can't predict, and then there's some things we can't, right? So, and I think the more information that we know, the better we'll be able to like deal with the world. A sense of history is like super useful because it gives you context to understand like what has happened in the past and what happens when these kind of things happen. So even though it's not the same type of disease, I almost always compare this to the arrival of HIV as a disease to the world, and how it took decades before, where in this moment now where we feel HIV is a controllable thing, we understand a lot about it. The average individual understands how not to get it, what to do if they get it, that it's not a death sentence, etc., etc. Science has gotten to the point where we're able to treat it and manage it and all of that. But that took a long time. And in between the time when it came to, consciousness, and then there was, a period of like terrible fear and people feeling this is the end of the world. We don't know what's going to happen after that, and that became part of psychology. Now we all take our shoes off at airports without thinking about it. But remember again that there was a time when people didn't take their shoes off at the airports. And then there was a time when people started taking their shoes off at the airport, and that was seen as a sign of the apocalypse. And today we all take our shoes off at the airport without batting an eyelid. And no one thinks it's a sign of the apocalypse. Everybody just thinks, yeah, you can't take like more than 100 meals onto the plane. And everybody knows that. But it wasn't always like that. And that happened. And then when when the restriction was first put on, people freaked out. Really badly too, to be honest. Which I think brings me to the point that in many ways, this is very transformative, and some of the things that have changed will be like this till the end of time. And so the question for the individual is to sit down and say, as a creator, I know I talked about systemic things, but I'm also talking about like, what's the name? A lot more people will work remotely just going forward. Like this is some people are just never going to step into an office again. And we think about that, like that's strange because many of us have gone from office to home. But you need to understand that there are some people who will enter the workforce never having seen the inside of an office. They're like a decade and they've never worked inside an office. And it's hard to think about that right now. I spend like most of my working life rebelling against the idea of offices and commutes. So I feel like the world has finally caught up to me. But yeah, but I think that accepting that some things are changing and figuring out how to navigate what that looks like, I think that's like just a very super, super useful thing, which is, and last thing I would say is, again, is you have more agency than you think. No matter how much agency you think you have just a lot more agency than you think. You need to figure out like what the spots are, how to manage your psychology, how to, what you can do to make situation you're in bearable, what you can do to make it change if you can, what you can change, and how to do, how to take control of the pieces that you can't take control of, and accept that that's what it is.
I love your example of taking off the shoes off after 9/11 and how people may get used to all these upheavals kind of settle down, and so many new things can become the new normal. And so our mind space frees up, right? The disk space frees up again, and you have more kind of space and power to be creative and think. Of course, this also has its negative sides, like some things we should not get used to. But I think this is a really, really excellent example. And I'm also thinking, and Laura, I would also love to hear your points on this, because as you were talking, I was thinking about you know, we're talking about writing your life story. But for many people, there's first a need to understand the narrative of their past, because they can even just understand like what is the story I'm in before I can start writing it, right? Is there a discontinuity now because of the pandemic? We will talk about pre-pandemic lives and post-pandemics. You know, you will meet your friends who got married and you will be like, oh, did you meet her before pandemic? Because it's going to be something completely different, right? Did you get this job before or after? Did you get the mortgage before or after? It's going to be a completely different level of human endeavor. It's just like, it's not the same genre. And I'm wondering, you know, are we, when we sit down in this period of confinement to think about our past, is this the same thing as you would have thought about your past 10 years ago? Or is this a completely different thing where we're like wrapping up something instead of continuing it, or instead of like writing it on?
Like, what do you mean about these 10 years thing you're saying? Like, how do I see my immediate past, like in my life, or like my heritage in my, like, which one is it?
If there was no pandemic, if we were 10 years ago, like, you know, in a situation where there's like, you know, financial crisis and war, but no pandemic, would it be the same process of psychologically of like, you know, sitting down and taking account of the past and figuring out what's next? Or is this a completely different level of, you know, challenge to do it now when we basically are pressing the resetting button in many ways globally? As Seyi said, we will not be returning to the office, or many of us will not, and some of us will never even go there in the first place.
Yeah. Oh, I don't really know how to answer that. Like, there are so many things I'm thinking about that. Yeah, no, I can't. Like right now, it, like how things are, I can't imagine anything different. I can only imagine like futures, like different futures. So I don't know what to say to that.
What are the different futures?
Hmm.
Are you thinking in best case scenario and worst case scenario, or like, is there no difference?
I'm always thinking best case scenario, because like that's my optimistic self, very annoying optimistic self. But I also think sometimes in these dystopian futures of like transparent face masks and just fun things that I would love to be a part of.
Seyi, any closing notes? I know you're also an optimist. So
I think that, so you're going to work wherever two planes fly into one of the tallest buildings in the world, and that changes things around the world for a decade, right? In a way that it's very difficult for people who didn't experience that as, you know, to grasp just how transformative that event was. And it becomes like this cascade of like things that just went on and on and on and on, right? It's like Patriots Act and blah, 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 and all of that. I was listening to a podcast once that said that there was supposed to be a hearing around in the US Senate or House of Representatives about online privacy just before 9/11. It was supposed to happen just after 9/11. And then 9/11 just kind of like threw everything upside down. And we wake up in the morning, and so you'd have like all these decks, and it's like, oh, in the post, well, I was too young, I never saw any decks, but you know, essentially it's like you'd have security experts on TV saying things like, going post 9/11. And then post 9/11 world changed to in a post, what was that thing? Post Snowden world. In a post Snowden world, blah, blah, blah. And in a post this and a post that. Because the world is always having one of these things, right? It's like post Occupy Wall Street world. It's post one thing or the other. We're always doing something. Something is always happening and we're always losing our minds. We're like, this is obviously the one that kills all of us. This is it. We're at the end now. Maybe one day we'll be right. Maybe one of them will finally get us eventually. But my sense is that I don't want to say that this is like the others because that's not what I'm saying. But my sense is that there's always something. We're always doing one of these things. We're always like freaking out rightly about things. Rightly, I mean this like rightly. Rightly, we're freaking out about things. Right? I don't know what I'm going to do. This is bad, and that's kind of like how I feel. I feel that you're always up against some upheaval. If you take a 30, 40-year view of history, you're like, well, there's a lot more upheaval now. If you take 100, 200, 300, 1,000 year of history, I was like, this is kind of like, this is boring, right? It's kind of like, feels like the same thing all the time. So that's how I think about it. I think that this will adjust us, we will adjust, we may survive, we may not. The virus may mutate in the winter and start killing people like really quickly. That's a thing that can happen. The economy may crash, the US economy may crash and like set up just like a bunch of dominoes across the world, blah, blah, blah. And these are things that can happen. Alternatively, we may be back in January with transparent face masks and concerts in June 2022. And that'll be the end of that. I was like, remember the pandemic?
I have this uncomfortable notion in life that, if you read history, there's always, you talk about the post this, post that eras, but there's always a pre something. And the people living in the pre, they don't know they're pre. Like you talk about like pre-World War, blah, blah, blah. It's like the First World War didn't know they were the First World War. They thought they were the Great War. They thought this was it. And then you're just like, just wait. 30 million people died. Oh, that's nothing. Just like, stay tuned. We're coming up next. And I'm always like, am I pre-what? Like, what is this era that I live in my life? And I'm just like, la, 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 la. Okay, I will wear a mask. Everything is going to be fine. And maybe there's like, our future selves watching us like, oh girl, you have no idea. And on the other end of this, there's also this, if you go way back, you will see that every single civilization came up with their notions of apocalypse, right? And there was the last judgment and all the, basically every developed religion has some kind of tale of genesis, but also kind of the end of the world. And my theory is always that it's because while humans are quite scared of their own personal mortality, even people who are religious have obviously concerns about it because we don't really have much information. The thing that we're even more scared of is that we die and like everything goes on as before. So humans were like, well, but if we all die at the same time, then my friends won't just like be able to go out afterwards, for like 2 months, like having a drink on me, but like afterwards, just like they just like move on and my spouse remarries, and you're like, that's even more scary, especially when people are like dropping off pretty young, right? So we just came up with these kind of ideas about the apocalypse, and it's just like, that's fine. I die and all my friends as well. So I'm always kind of like torn between these two things that, yeah, but probably I'm also with Seyi on the one day, somebody will be right. Just statistically, if this goes on long enough. Should we end with the apocalypse?
The apocalypse is a good way to end things.
A good way to end. I'm going to actually have a closing question to Laura. Explain to me as the designer, what is a transparent mask? What will be like, summer, autumn, or what, spring, summer 2022? Because now downtown in Brussels, like you see like Gucci and all these high ends, and everybody is selling masks, and then you can wear it.
Yeah, there was this
on your mouth. It's just like I always wanted, right?
I remember I don't remember the name of this NBA player that had like a face mask that was transparent, and it was very famous at the time. And for me, it's so strange that everyone is wearing like, well, it's not strange, it's just regular how things are going to go. Um but yeah, I keep thinking about like this because it really messes with your ability to communicate having a closed mask. And I think clear masks need to happen really, because like how else are you going to like say hi to your neighbor that you don't want to say hi to? Do you just want to see like be like, with a mask you can't do that. So yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
I mean, if you design your label, Laura, I will be one of your first, and I will order for everybody in the Interintellect. So it's like you can get, if we get a group discount. Um, Thank you so much, guys. I love this. I love these ideas about like, you know, create but also adapt. This is kind of how I would sum up what you guys shared, and I'm so lucky to have you guys in the community. And thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. I'm going to stop the recording. So if there's anything else you want to share afterwards that is not fit for print, there will be a chance. Thank you everybody who watched us today.